Studies Section 9. Nigeria's Foreign Policy in the Second Republic. Introduction. This studies section shall expose you to the conduct of Nigeria's foreign policy during the Shehu Shagari administration. We shall focus on features, challenges, and achievements of the administration in the conduct and administration of Nigeria's foreign policy. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study section, you should be able to 1. Point out the features of Shehu Shagari administration in Nigeria's foreign policy. 2. Highlight achievements recorded by the regime in Nigeria's foreign policy administration. Discuss challenges faced by the regime in Nigeria's foreign policy administration. Features of Nigeria's foreign policy under the Shehu Shagari administration. The period between 1979 and 1983 marked Nigeria's second attempt to operate a democracy. Fashioned after the American presidential system, the new system signaled a fundamental turn in the political history of the country. When the Obasanjo regime handed over power to a democratically elected civilian regime on 1st October 1979, it handed over a foreign policy which was a source of credit and respect and a new constitution which was designed to accommodate the special needs of the Nigerian society. Nigeria's foreign policy under President Shehu Shagari turned out to be less eventful compared to the standards set by its predecessors. The legitimacy crisis of the regime as well as the economic recession of the Second Republic caused by global oil price fall had serious implications for Nigeria's foreign policy because it reduced the autonomy Nigeria had hitherto enjoyed from the capitalist powers. As a result, like in the regime of Balewa of the First Republic, Nigeria's foreign policy under Shagari regime was conservative, courteous, pro-West, and unpopular. Shagari had to cope with the worsening economic fortune of the country. Past regimes had neglected other possible sources of foreign exchange earning, including agriculture, with the discovery of oil. Thus, the crisis in the oil market seriously affected the Nigerian economy. Nigeria's oil earnings fell from 10.1 billion naira in 1979 to 5.161 billion naira in 1982. This triggered off a series of crises that affected every sector of the economy. Mass unemployment was accompanied with inflation resulting from acute shortage of consumer goods. The government had to resort to importation of items like rice. The new civilian government ran a huge deficit in its budget and had to resort to foreign borrowing from private and international sources to make up for the shortfall in revenue. The foundation for the nation's debt crisis had actually been laid by the mismanagement of the oil wealth, but was aggravated by the spoiled politics of the Shagari era. Consequently, internal public debt rose from 4.6 billion in 1979 to 22.2 billion naira in 1983. Inflation, which was 23% in 1983, rose to 40% in 1984, while the country's external reserve, put at $8.50 billion in 1981, got depleted drastically thereafter. These developments, characterized by economic downturn, marked a turning point in Nigeria's foreign policy. Debt replaced aid while the critical issues became merely economic. Nigeria's credibility waned in the eyes of foreign investors, and large-scale corruption and extreme political bickering engendered by the belief of the political class that politics was a means of financial enrichment aggravated the situation. Nigeria's foreign policy, lacking the financial backup of the 1970s, receded to a low profile akin to the Balewa era. This made the Shagari government to start negotiation with the IMF for an extended fund facility (EFF) loan of $2.5 billion in 1982. The deportation of more than 2 million illegal aliens by the Shagari government in January 1983 in its alleged bid to manage the economic crisis further worsened Nigeria's image in the international community. Many of the deported aliens having come from West African countries of Ghana, Togo, and Equatorial Guinea etc. The development soured Nigerians' relations with its West African neighbors and queried Nigerians' commitment to functional cooperation and good neighborly relations under the ECOWAS framework. This was, however, a more realistic approach to Nigeria's policy of good neighborliness and role as a regional benefactor. However, President Shagari took some non-conservative stance in his strong opposition to the bloody coup d'etat that brought Samuel Doe to power in Liberia and his opposition to Reagan's policy of engagement in South Africa. The government opposed the U.S. constructive engagement policy, which linked the independence of Namibia to the withdrawal of Cuban forces from Angola. Decolonization and the eradication of racism remained the main focus of the administration at the continental level. The Organization of African Unity, the Commonwealth, and the United Nations were the main channels for articulating demands for sanctions against the government of South Africa. Support for liberation movements in South Africa was to maintain even though the yearly 5 million naira aid to this movement was stopped in 1980 due to economic decline. Nevertheless, the government gave a grant of $10 million to the newly installed Zimbabwean government under Robert Mugabe to enable it acquire the Zimbabwe herald from its white South African owners. Nigeria remained committed to the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries (OPEC) despite strong agitation to pull out of the cartel because of the limitations it placed on production quotas. Femi Otubanjo had described Shagari's 4-year rule as a period of recess for Nigeria's foreign policy. According to him, the regime of Sheikh Shagari inherited a foreign policy which was very popular with the people as well as being the object of respect in the international system. But while adapting its principles, goals, and rhetoric, the regime quickly showed that it neither had the zeal nor the competence to keep up the pace it inherited. Before long, it became clear that the regime, lacking the conceptual framework and an explicit focus, was not about to duplicate the enthusiasm of its predecessor nor to strike out on any foreign policy path. The result was that Nigeria's foreign policy remained at the level of routine observance of existing relations and obligations. Otubanjo, 1989, page 6. Achievements of the era. In keeping with existing obligations, Shagari gave a grant of $10 million to the new Mugabe government in Zimbabwe in 1980 to enable it acquire the Zimbabwe Herald newspaper from its white South African owner. Other diplomatic successes include Nigeria's frontline role in the Lagos Plan of Action that set out a blueprint for an African economic community. At the global level, the increased interest of the U.S. in Nigeria culminated in the visit of Vice President George Bush to Nigeria in 1982. Challenges of the era. The Shagari regime had legitimacy problem which limited its ability to perform whilst the problem of the economy was too absorbing to allow the pursuance of foreign policy in any successful way. President Sheikh Shagari was unable to inspire or use foreign policy to improve the economic fortunes of the state or enhance on international solidarity. The president's state visits to London and Washington, his vacillation on issues such as Chad, the Nigerian-Cameroon border dispute, the national malaise, and the expulsion of illegal aliens, and the administration's failure to rally support for the OAU summit in Tripoli in 1982 were as controversial as they were perceived as being detrimental to the African leadership aspiration of Nigeria. Study section summary. The failure of the Shagari government austerity measures to curtail the economic crisis and the social chaos which greeted the 1983 widely rigged election paved the way for the re-emergence of the military on 31st December 1983. In this study session, you learned that the Shagari regime was said to have been a period of recess for Nigeria's foreign policy. This may have been caused by exuberances of democratic processes, low regime legitimacy, and economic recession. However, Shagari took some unconventional stance by condemning the coup in Liberia by Samuel Doe and was opposed to the U.S. constructive engagement in Southern Africa. This is the end of study section 9. Thanks for listening.